Good afternoon, ladies and Education Research and Training Symposium, CERTS 2019. As a reminder, you'll be able to find post-event coverage, including audio recordings, slide decks, and Signal Magazine articles at www.afcea.org/events/past events. This link will be updated by the end of next week.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for those remarks there to get us going here. We will have slides up on the website. These slides that you're going to hear this afternoon, plus others that were approved to put on the website it's within the next day or two. I'm Mike Warlick again, and my notes are really cool here. I hope you found the morning's workshop to be challenging. I hope you found the morning workshops to be challenging. I can tell you right now, it was interesting seeing the dynamics of these three groups. And you're going to hear the results here, and I'm not going to keep you very long here because we're a little bit behind the schedule here. But we had three groups. You'll hear that they had different topics. All of those are on the website so that you can see the topics. Some of these topics have changed in the last 2.5 hours, and you'll hear that brief. Some of the three topics wound up being two topics. In one case, 4 topics is still 4 topics, and you'll hear that first. So the rules for this are 15 minutes for each group. Okay, so you got to cover your topics in that 15-minute time frame so we can finish up before 3 o'clock today because there's people catching flights this afternoon. 2:45 is our target. We'll see if we can get there. Our first group is educating the training and ready force. Brigadier General Neil Hersey, the Commandant of the school, has taken the lead for this and is going to provide the overview of the findings of his team. Sir, welcome.
So, first of all, thanks to AFCEA again for putting on a fantastic event. I think my broad group was a great reflection of what this event does and bringing the broader community together. I saw representation from academia, from industry, from the DoD on the civilian side, from the DoD on the uniform side, and just interested people. So we looked at basically creating readiness, which happens to correspond with the number one priority for our Army Chief of Staff, and probably also the number one priority. If you listen to Rob Joyce speak about it, it's very, very important for our country to be ready in this space. So we looked at how do we do that from a broad perspective on the education side, and we had 4 themes which kind of corresponds roughly to the 4 specific problem sets that we looked at. So my takeaways, and my groups will talk in a little bit more detail, not too long, but we'll talk a little bit more detail about it, is 1, we got to start earlier, and we have to gain and maintain both momentum and interest in the field. So whether that's at childbirth, probably not quite that early, but probably at kindergarten, and then throughout the life cycle of that person. Second, we've got to have a continuum of education, development, employment, and refresh or recurrency, as we call it in aviation. So understanding that technology is always changing and changing more rapidly in this field, there has to be a constant refresh and reacquainting with technology. Third, we got to have a way to check ourselves. We got to be able to assess and make adjustments to our education, and we have to do it very, very rapidly in multiple forms. That's for DoD, academia, and the commercial sector. And then last, we've got a posture for the future with a solid foundation and base that we can pivot from. So whatever that next technology is, we've got to have enough of a knowledge and ability base on our workforce to be able to turn to that through, whether it's through something like nano degrees or just specialized education or massing on a new technology that we need to address. So I'm going to turn it over to my first group lead, Major Promotable Beam, who's going to talk about the takeaways from the first group.
Good afternoon. Next slide, please. So in the group that I co-chaired, the question that we had in front of us was, how do we inspire students, talking K through college, into this field of cyber? And one of the things we came up with is a 3-tiered approach where we target not only the students, but the parents, as well as the educators in a couple of areas. So first would be exposure. We want to create a cyber marketing campaign, almost to get at them young, so that we can inspire them into cyber and get them exposed. And we want to create this thing where we influence the influencer. These children, they look up to their parents, they look up to their educators, and if we can recruit and get the parents and the educators on board, they would influence the children to kind of go in the direction of cyber. The other thing is creating some sort of incentives. Not only incentivizing schools to create these types of programs and maintain it, creating incentives for the students themselves to participate in this. So we're talking about financial incentives as well as competitive incentives, so they can compete and maybe earn scholarships as they go. And we want to grow the brand of cyber. So we want cyber to be a brand name. We want cyber to be on a level of professionals. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a cyber professional. That's what we're trying to create. And if we get in there early, that's how we're going to build this workforce. We'll go next.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Rachel O'Connell, Cyber Training Battalion Commander, and our question focused on how we, government, military, industry, work with primary, secondary, and post-secondary institutions in order to ensure our graduates are prepared to enter the cyber workforce. So we started off our work group by trying to find out how many people were actually familiar with the DoD Instruction 8140, which lays out all of the certifications and requirements for personnel going into the cyber workforce. And come to find out, there was a lot of people that weren't actually familiar with that document, so I'm glad I was able to provide a place to go in Google and find out some more information. But the overview really of what came out of that question was the fact that we needed to look at a lot of things, and there was a little bit of redundancy, I think, between the first group and our group. But it's really engendering the interest, understanding, and acumen in students all the way throughout. So whether we start at the elementary level, middle school level, and going all the way up through the college level, how do we do those things? So one of the things that was really interesting that came out towards the tail end of our groups that we're cycling through was identifying the deficit. So really finding out what it is that we need to bridge that skill set gap between academia and the actual workforce. Because we say that there's a lot of people that need to fill IT and IA jobs across cyber. However, what is it the skill sets we're actually looking for? One of the things we actually found in our discussions is that there are two prevailing thoughts. One is that you need to have a piece of paper certification. The other is that, does that piece of paper actually say I'm certified? So one of the things that we go forward and have to look at across the nation is, do we have an assessment standard by which we can wave away the piece of paper and actually look at experience, skills, and other things that are gathered through internships and through academia that allow us to be just as qualified as someone that's getting a certificate. And then adjusting the approach is probably one of the bigger themes here. So after talking to many educators and finding that there's intimidation in the word cyber, a lot of students don't understand what we mean when we say that. They tend to shy away from it because they don't understand the multifaceted nature of cyber and the many different approaches you can take to pursue a career in cyber. So it's how are we messaging, starting that message earlier, as we already said, but then taking it a step further, and who are we leveraging within the community to spread that message? So one of the things that we know is not happening is we're not talking to recruiting enough, to educate them on how to send that message. We're not leveraging our veterans that have come out of the cyber force to spread that message, and we're certainly not tapping into the professionals and the college students pursuing those careers already or getting ready to pursue those careers to work with our students and get them to where they need to be.
Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Elizabeth Popiak. I'm the Deputy Director for the Cyber Branch Proponent Office at the U.S. Army Cyber School. And our group focused on the education that's required for the future cyber force and how do we inform students of that requirement. So surprisingly, much of the feedback was focused on both technical and non-technical education that we think is very important. For example, number one recommendation, we should probably try to train local government leaders, teachers, and career counselors and proposed a future forum, not dissimilar to this one, where we can talk to mayors, county commissioners, and other executives about cyberspace operations, the technology that underlies that, so they can understand the plans presented to them by the cyber professionals. We also need to purposefully teach interpersonal skills, logics, and systems integration, as you can see here. And what underpins that is an understanding of the technology. It's a theme in all the different groups. Understanding not only hardware, software, coding, operating systems, that's a foundation. Introducing it young is important, but again, the future workforce is going to be flexible and reactive to new technologies. So we have disruptive new technologies all the time that are introduced, and the nano degrees that were discussed by General Hersey a moment ago, like just-in-time training, just-in-time education that's tailored to those disruptive technologies will become important to keep our communities of practitioners trained and ready to react to those threats, either to the marketplace or to our nation. Another recommendation would be to identify individual's aptitude. The panel this morning talked about potentially leveraging the strengths of autistic people. And so the folks in this group agreed, and they thought it would be very important to identify aptitude early, identifying people's strengths and capitalizing on those. We need folks who are cyber lawyers. We need people who are policy experts. We need people who are technologists. We need people who can be integrators and executives in this space. There's room for everyone, and I think in the future, a myopic focus on solely the technologists will limit what we can do in a broad spectrum. So I think we need to be more inclusive in the future and make sure we capitalize on everybody's strengths. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. Major Mike Patrick. I'm the executive officer at the Army Cyber School. I had the 4th sub work group. Our work group was looking at who are the key partners, not stakeholders, the key partners in ensuring success and educating our cyber workforce. What we started off looking at initially, well, essentially what we were looking at is what partnerships exist that maybe the larger cyber community of interest isn't aware of, maybe what's in the works, and then what's out there that maybe we're not thinking about. There's lots of good discussion, and I think we honed in on the main partners being academia, private and private public sector, as well as our that's academia. That would be the K through 12 schools. So what we were looking at a minimum was to identify these partnerships, but our desired outputs were to actually ID something for action, and that'll take me into the first action. So our first group had a heavy population of representatives from the Richmond County School District, and they were identifying a shortfall of cyber instructors and cyber mentors for any initiatives such as like Cyber Patriot, things of that nature. And that's the beauty of an event like this. In the very next work group, we had some students from the cyber school who are in a holdover status, and we're looking for things to do to maintain their skills. So from one rotation to the next, we found a match for that need. So one thing for action that cyber school will take going forward is I'm looking to partner with Richmond County schools and honestly, by extension, other schools within the area to partner for things of that nature, like any sort of cyber curriculum, cyber like mentorship, be it Cyber Patriot, Girls Who Code. So that was a quick win brought together by an event such as this. Next thing next recommendation, which was probably the simplest but the best recommendation personally that I saw today, was developing homeschool programs centered around cyber education. I think it just makes sense, right? It's portable, it's responsive to change. It's taught in a setting where the student can get attention, like the right amount of attention. So I think that's something that should definitely be looked at going forward. And then the final recommendation, this was a common theme in all four of our rotations. There was a big focus on our K through 8 population and how do we develop curriculum for them? Like what are the core competencies for that for those grade levels? And I think the answer is there. As we look at having the answers in our post-secondary institutions, with the centers of academic excellence, and then around the nation, you can look at the high schools, having some sort of pathways type programs where they're championing cyber education. I think looking at those items, we can derive our K through 8 curriculum from that. Okay. That's all I have. Yes, sir.
So thanks one more time to everyone that participated, and I just want to give a little perspective on the folks that you got to work with in those groups. All four of those group leaders have served in leadership positions and as operators in our cyber mission force. So I'm very fortunate to have them at the school, and I'm glad that you all got to meet them, and I'm sure they learned something from you too. So thank you very much.
Little did this group know, I think, when they went in there that they were going to rotate about every 15 minutes and work on these topics as a team. What a great methodology that was. Thank you very much. So Workshop 2. Workshop 2 focuses on research initiatives and advances for government and industry. Colonel Dan Bennett was the chair for this event. He couldn't stand the results and had to leave early, and he put his program at risk by assigning Eric Toler to kick it off.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I was just joking earlier about I just recently retired from the Army, and I think when I put in my retirement, it took 48 hours for them to come back and say, absolutely, we're going to let you retire. Primarily because I broke protocol quite often, and you will see that as we go through the presentation. Okay, we'll start there. So our topic, research initiatives advanced for government and industry. So you'll see that our slide may look a little bit different from the Army slide, who does the dress, and I used to do that. But I really wanted to start with, before recommendations, going back and identifying what the problem is. And so you can read this. It's kind of a bold statement, and I'm happy to argue that with you. But as the former senior intelligence officer for the Cyber National Mission Force, bring it on. If we don't figure out how to combine our efforts in research amongst the three entities, then we're going to continue to fall behind our adversaries. What are the challenges? Why is that? So you answer the why. Well, we're constantly evolving requirements. And that's the polite way of saying we're not very good at writing requirements. And we talked about why earlier. Also, there's a lack of threat understanding because of the classification of what that threat information is. So if you were allowed to share that with universities, with some of our private industry partners that may not have the top secret clearances, again, at an unclassified level, there may be more of a sense of urgency to actually do more research in this field. We also have a stovepipe structure. So if you think of the cylinders of excellence, even on a single academic institution, departments compete. Within the Army, we compete. 12 years ago in the Pentagon, we were talking about what cyberspace operations was. Army and Signal Corps competed, not for what was best for the Army or the nation, but what was best for their particular branch. And sorry if I'm frank about that. We have a competitive culture that drives us apart. So what makes us great also provides us with a disadvantage in this field. Our competitors, the Chinas and the Russias of the world, don't have the problem of the separation between state, private industry, and academia. It's all one thing. So how do we bridge that gap? Okay, and information protection concerns. So you can talk about security classification, intellectual property, all those concerns. So those are the challenges. So what are the opportunities? Again, I took this job at the Georgia Cyber Center because of that first bullet. What the states can do to help the rest of the nation to win, to be successful in the cyberspace field. And so if you look at, hey, let's not just talk about it, let's do something. Well, the state of Georgia has done something. So this is my shameless plug of what they've done, what we've done now since I've got my Georgia driver's license. So how about slapping $100 million in cash, taxpayer dollars, and building a phenomenal facility right down the Riverwalk? And if you haven't seen it yet, I'll meet you out after and I can come give you a tour of the facility. But it's the only place in the country right now that has private industry, academia, and government in one building with one common mission for cybersecurity. And someone mentioned earlier about, hey, I want to be the best state in the country. We don't care about that. But our vision is to lead a revolution in cybersecurity through unprecedented innovation and collaboration. And so if you bring all these entities together, not just for conferences, not just for partnerships, for special projects, but that becomes the norm all the time, and then you use these great conferences to bring back and show us the great things that you've done that then we can spread across the country. So if the states, smaller governments, more agile, can actually do a lot more, I believe. And we're going to do that. So all the things that were just talked about are the same initiatives that we have, and then we want to partner with the Cyber Center of Excellence, with Army Cyber Command, with our private industry partners to get all that done. And we've got a plan to do that. So the resources are already available. We kind of talked about that. It's just how do you distribute those and form the partnerships that enable us to be successful. We talked about DevOps. I know, sir, you brought that up when you were over at our center. So if that's your model for capabilities development, it's not just for the IT and how we've done that, but it's also for any capability that's, I would say, an advanced technology. I was an intel officer, so we did this all the time. Quick reaction capabilities that we were able to distribute. A former organization of mine, which as an MI officer, I thought was the most incredible intelligence capability I've ever seen, and it was this model. It was, and matter of fact, we called it a perpetual beta environment. And it did a lot of great things, let's just say that. But that's the model that you have to adopt. So you bring your researchers into your operations field, and that's what we can do here at Fort Gordon. That's why the Cyber Center for Georgia is in Augusta and not Atlanta, because of those federal connections, the Department of Energy connections that are right here. So that's another opportunity. Align university research to real-world cybersecurity challenges. So as Augusta University, I'll put on my other hat just for a second, as we're hiring researchers, so PhD-level researchers, as we bring people in and explain what we're trying to do here, the thing that they're most interested in is the opportunity to work with operations. I asked them, so this is from across not only the continental United States, but across the world, what are you interested in? What appeals to you about this job? What's the ability to do something that matters? So publishing is interesting and it's valuable, but to be able to publish something that actually contributes to national security is fascinating, right? And so having that opportunity, and then internships. So if you look at the partnerships we're creating from federal government to state government, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation is in our building, for example, that they want to do internships. And the neat thing about cybersecurity is what's applicable to defending the DoD is also applicable to defending any other network across our private industry sectors. And then last is public-private partnerships, and public-public partnerships for that matter. So it's all about those partnerships. We had many examples. I didn't want to list them all, but there's models out there, and we can do those things. So how do you take who does best what? So when we talk about the university systems, just in Georgia, we had the conversation, what can Georgia Tech do versus North Georgia versus Augusta University, et cetera, and break that out, and then expand that across the country. But people have to know what the needs are and be able to funnel that. We talked about the funnel of people in training. We need to funnel those problems and requirements so they can get parsed out to our university system so they can actually do that research. And I'll wrap up there, and I'll be followed by Pablo.
Okay, so my group got lucky. We got two really easy questions. How do we recruit and retrain the workforce? And then how do we set prioritizations for research? So in the hour and 45 minutes we had left, we also cured cancer and got the government working again. So of the two challenges, we thought that the less egregious one was how do we set prioritization for research? We need to get much better within the DoD defining requirements. Oftentimes our requirements are overly broad or overly specific, and they don't get to what the warfighter actually needs. They don't get to the desired effect. We need to make sure that when we define those things that we include not only the customer who's going to be the end user, but if it's got a computational unit or it's software that's going to run a computational unit, we need to have somebody from the cyber workforce adding a little bit of adult supervision to it. I don't attach stuff to an aircraft without having an aviator in the room. I don't attach something to an artillery piece without having artillerymen in the room. I better not put code on a processor without having somebody that understands code and processors in the room. We need to update the federal acquisition regulations. It is horribly, tragically, hilariously outdated. I cannot operate at the speed of cyber when my speed of acquisition is in 4-year programs of record. Can't get there from here. What's more, industry isn't willing to work with us because it's horrendously expensive for them to operate that way. So we end up getting bad solutions, time late, and more expensively than need be. We need to mandate when we create those requirements, open standards. In World War II, the pack for an average infantryman was 80 pounds. Today, it's still 80 pounds. The difference is they're now carrying 5 different batteries because every vendor, to recoup the cost from operating within the FAR, has special connectors to their batteries. So if I want a battery for a Harris radio, I better go to Harris Company and buy their battery pack. I can't remember the last time I hooked up something to my computer that didn't use a USB connector or a USB-C connector. We've got to get better about that. The buy-in for industry for doing that is the fact that when we buy a long-term project, they will stand able to compete when we add on modules. So if I buy something from Lockheed Martin and I demand open standards, Lockheed Martin is willing to do that because when I go buy a module for something that Northrop Grumman developed for me, they get to bid on that contract as well because open standards were followed and it's not vendor specific. We need to allow for better collaborative environments when we develop these capabilities. There's not enough conversation going on between the vendor and the customer. We write bad standards, they misinterpret our bad standards, we get a very expensive product that doesn't suit our needs because we're not sitting in the same room and co-developing these things. UCCs should set the priority. The needs of our cyber are not significantly different than they are for fleet cyber, are not significantly different than they are for MARFOR cyber. Somebody needs to be adults in the room and look across the service cyber components and say, these capability requirements are the same. We're going to develop the same solution once and actually make it joint. We're really bad at that. The Joint Strike Fighter is not joint. We've got 4 different variants for 4 different services. That doesn't work. We need to leverage, coordinate, and find ways to differently exercise the defense work. The programs of record and the acquisition cycle are really good at the 0 to 5 year point. DARPA takes a look at 15 years and beyond, which leaves a nice big gap in the 5 to 15 year point that nobody's addressing. The innovation centers that have stood up and are standing up, Army Futures Command, SOFWorks, JSOCX, are great places to do that. They're great places to do that under a joint look under DefenseWorks. Next slide. Okay, so now that we solved defense federal acquisitions, recruitment and training of our forces. We need to define career progression. We're really bad at that. We take smart young men and women that have skills in the cyber workforce, and we pop them out of the mission that they love so they can go jump a career milestone that doesn't really further the mission, doesn't further intent of the service member, and frustrates them into leaving the service. We spend a tremendous amount of time doing initial training and make no investments in follow-on training. Education and continual training are a must. It was mentioned earlier, I'll mention it again. You do your initial acquisition, initial training, initial certification, go to a mission. You do update training, recertification, and go on to your next mission. We send infantrymen to the rifle range on a repeated basis. I don't know why we tell cyber operators, you've got a CISSP, you need no more training. That doesn't pass muster. When we give them that training and that education, we need to make sure that that follow-on command that they go to actually uses that skill set. It makes no sense to send somebody to Naval Postgraduate School or AFIT to get a master's degree in computer science and then tell them that they're going to go be a commo in a battalion out in the field. That's a waste of talent. It frustrates the service member, and it gives them very little reason to stay in the service for an additional 10 years. Didn't make it to the slide, but I'll add this one in. Gentlemen, with my apologies. It is really frustrating to be a JO or a mid-career officer and look at a cyber unit and see that there's a field artilleryman or surface warfare officer in charge. I want to have leadership that I want to emulate. And what that tells me is that the cyber forces are not valued, their skill set are not valued, and their people are not valued to lead combat troops. I wouldn't take a commo and give an infantry regiment or a tank battalion. I don't know why I'm taking an artillery officer or a surface warfare officer and giving them our cyber or fleet cyber. That doesn't make sense. Recruitment, consistent aptitude testing. So far, we're just kind of taking whoever wants in. We're starting to take a cursory look at their computer scientist, but there isn't a cyber mission in there that doesn't have a human component to it. Every cyber mission is, by very definition, a PSYOP mission. At the end of the day, the effect is an operator at the other end making a decision that is advantageous to me based upon information that I'm showing them or hiding from them. So we need a little bit more than computer scientists, and I am a computer scientist. Industry. We've got a problem with industry, and the problem is not industry itself. The problem is the clearance process. We mandate that they have clearances because we overclassify everything. It's behind the green door. But then DOD doesn't want to sponsor more than what's required. So there are 25 bodies assigned to this contract. They get 25 bodies, and one of them quits, leaves, dies, goes on vacation. And the enterprise, DOD, has to wait 2 years until another cleared person gets in. We need to allow the contractors to have a ready pool of pre-cleared personnel so that when one body moves out, we can rapidly slide one in without incurring a loss of time and resources for the enterprise. Thank you very much.
You didn't give me the ceasefire yet, sir. Hey, good afternoon. So we had a great discussion. Real quick, just kind of looking at the audience. One, it's phenomenal, so thanks for being here. Two, what we really quickly realized, and what I really quickly realized in the last 2 days, how many people heard modeling and simulation? Raise your hand. So if you're in my group, you probably heard modeling and simulation, but really a lot of the discussion was not about modeling and simulation. And why is that, do you think? Since we invest $2 billion a year just in the Army for modeling and simulation and training in the Army. Because the requirements, right, for cyber and EW, you've got to operationalize what that means, because it's going from a multi-domain battle, from a kinetic fight into a logical space, right? All right, how do you do that? You can't see it. The knuckle draggers don't get too excited about not seeing something blow up, quite frankly. Okay, blunt force trauma. I just retired out of the Cyber Battle Lab. I'm going through CyberQuest training. I've got a 10th Mountain commander. He's wondering about what a SEMA cell is even doing there, right? I said, hey, we're bringing in all these really cool capabilities. I said, and he said, no, I've got my team here. What do you need? What are you talking about, Bill? It's like, look, here's the deal. We set this scenario up where maneuver starts with an intel picture, right? You got to have intel, and it's kind of made up, and we do this scripted scenario. But what I want you to do and think about is all the what-if scenarios that you've run through your team. What if this happens? What if we can't even get to the seaports? So if you've served a day in the life in the military and you've done any wartime plans, look at the logistics. Very simply, right? It resonates. Look at the logistics. So modeling and simulation has 2 program of records in the Army currently. It's one SAF, one semi-automated forces, right? It's entity level all the way down to the soldier, right? So you can build the characteristics data model sets into those entities. But then the requirements come back and said, hey, we want to sprinkle some cyber EW on top of that. And that's great. So are we realistically, as an Army, going to build those capabilities into every entity? The answer is no. So where the Army's at today, and I'm going up to AMSO, up to the Pentagon and to the Mark Center the first week of February to lead a discussion on where we should go, right? I'm not tooting my horn, I'm the only 57th that served across all spectrums within modeling and simulation. So I bring a little bit to the table. I've led it for the last 2 years. And so I'm directing dollars to be spent on these gaps, right? I've got to take off my new contractor hat, warfighter heart, and say, hey, realistically, we've got to have active, everything's active. We can't talk about it. We've got to go down to the CPB. We got to go down to the CPT teams. Say, what's important to you? And no longer can one SAF build these one-offs, which they are. They have cyber and EW capabilities built into the platform currently today. But also there's got to be this toolkit that we get you all's requirements, and not from a contractor perspective, but from a warfighter perspective, how we can display your what-if comments or what-if requirements. And so I'm back to the BCT commander who's role-playing the BCT, ABCT in a modeling and simulation environment. And I'm talking to him, I'm trying to coach him through modeling and simulation and what he's going to see in the mission command systems and the integration of that piece. And here it is. You ready? I'm almost world famous for this. So, SEMA mission, SEMA mission, SEMA mission. And I look around, I'm looking at the talk, and I was, what are you talking about, SEMA mission, SEMA? Okay, back it up one step and say fire mission, fire mission, fire mission. Then they go, oh yeah, I know exactly what to do, sir. I said, by week 2, when I come in here and you have a logical attack on your network, if I don't hear SEMA mission, SEMA mission, SEMA mission, and active participation by the whole SEMA cell, you failed. And so I looked at the commander and I said, hey, can you handle that? He said, got it. So I always say crawl, walk, run. They were running week 2. So that's brilliant, right? So how do you operationalize multi-domain operations? Here's pretty much the top 3. You all's task is to, 1, look into modeling and simulation, but 2, there are different requirements. Cyber for cyber is sitting at this table. They're not interested for cyber for all, right? But the knuckle draggers, the war fighters that actually go do kinetic strikes, they're doing cyber for all. They want to see how it works, and it's our job to train them why it's important to have that non-kinetic activity within your space and understand it. Because they're the ones that are writing the requirements. They're the ones sitting at the table. Yeah, okay. All right, so I'm off. That was good. It's good discussion. And actively communicate. It's good. Yeah.
Hey, just thanks again for those that participated in the workshop. So you see we kind of had our own agendas a little bit, but want to give a special shout out to the Citadel that was in my group. They were our academic representation, so thank you.
A little intense, a little intense. Okay, we're now going to hear from group number 3, who's prodding me from behind here. That's good. And this topic is going to be Indicators of Effective Workforce Development Initiative by Captain Glenn Hernandez, retired captain. And look forward to this session. This session put a lot of effort into it on the front end, so let's look and see what comes out the back end here.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, segue from the model and simulation, when we before we broke out, we started talking about indicators, and we talked about you can have models and theories, but then once a system is in place, you're going to have some practical application and reality start to set in. And so when you look at the cyber pipeline of the resources in our country that are going to fill that demand signal from industry, government, and academia, how do we know we're making the right adjustments to that, which led us to the topic of the indicators. So that's how we started before we went into breakout. So we went into 2 groups. One was on building the workforce, again, looking at indicators, and the second was sustaining the workforce, looking at indicators. The bottom line was that there are really no good indicators across the country that can cause us to make those adjustments. That's the bottom line from the 2 groups, so I'll start from the front. But we started out yesterday, well, what can we say is actionable? What can we say are some things that we can point to in the future to say, are we making progress? And that's where we started really trying to understand in the 2 groups. So I'll go to the next slide. Also, we couldn't have done this as individuals, so I want to bring up to the front before we forget to recognize them. Brian Green was one of our lead experts from Learning Tree International. Unfortunately, I think DoD, Bobby Sanders and Ryan Farr, they're still here. Okay, come up front. I just wanted to recognize them. And then also we had from NSA, Dr. Toler and Lisa Hauk, right? If they're still here, go up front. And I just want you to recognize what type of expertise and knowledge and passion these folks are bringing to the workshop. And I just wanted to recognize them before I went into the explanations. So the group that participated in Workshop 3, fantastic collaboration. They were very passionate. I saw some heated discussions, and they were really interesting because, this area is so complex and so broad, you're going to have those opinions, right? But it was great to see them collaborate in a professional manner. And some of this you'll see resonating in the other work groups. And so the idea was to come up with some things that we can point to in the future, and I'll explain those. So we wanted to take things that currently exist. So NSA has a great model of recruiting in a national capital region. Why can't we expand that model to extend to other parts of the country and internationally to fill that pipeline? So that was one of the things that the Building the Workforce group came up with. The second thing was increasing the outreach to K-12 in professional organizations. So one of the things that we identified is that there are great nonprofit organizations like AFCEA, ACT-IAC, and others, ICS Squared, ISACA, that can really add to the conversation, just like they do through the NIST-NICE conferences, but make them more actionable and accountable for producing some things. So through the future and development of this workforce topic within AFCEA, I think as a membership and in a professional organization, we have an opportunity to influence this conversation by our participation in this particular topic. The idea was to increase the targeted marketing across the K-12 pipeline. So in order to do that, we have to work in social media. We have to engage the future that understands and communicates on those forums and expand the awareness of this cyber pipeline beyond our current frameworks right in front of us in our workplaces. Improve the transparency and awareness of the clearance process. It's not very apparent to folks that are seeking possibly careers in the cyber fields what the clearance process even looks like. How do they know that they need to fulfill these? Because if they're violating some of those tenets so early on, right, it becomes more and more difficult as time goes on. So we need to do a better job as a community in being very upfront what those clearance requirements are through our communications publicly. Improve access and expand the stakeholders running the cyber camps to K-12 across the nation. There are so many. One particular organization I know of is the Cyber Complex. It's run by, I think it'll come to me, but they're trying to collaborate across all the camps across the country. It was started by DHS, and they wanted to understand and communicate. These are all the camps that are going on across the country. And as students are coming through and looking for things to do that summer, make that information more available to the public. CIS, Center for Internet Security, they have a website with CyberQuest and US Cyber Challenge that has Cyber Complex in there that explains all the camps that are going across the country and trying to link that to the NIST framework. Improve grant funding incentives for career development through the National Cyber Initiatives. To some extent, that goes out to industry as well. How do we get incentives and to get their participation in these type of programs like the camps and contribute to the problem resolution? And then collaborate with NICE to speak to the National Governors Association. So because NICE has a great forum where they have conferences in the country to get students, teachers, and organizations to have really robust conversations about this particular topic, right? Get NICE. Unfortunately, they're not here today, but we really want them to step up and contribute to these measures and indicators to help the country be more overt on whether we're making the right adjustments. So that's on the building of the workforce side and increased targeting. If you can go to the second slide. So the sustaining workforce, which was led by Bobby Sanders and Ryan Farr, it tended to gravitate more towards how we can sustain the workforce within DoD, and that really centered about the evolution of the 8140, right? How is DoD going to mature that manual for the country and as a baseline for others to really learn from and inform how to mature the cyber profession within an organization. So some of the things that we can probably point to in the future is how well are they coding and baselining and identifying the gaps within the Federal Cyber Workforce Assessment Act. Because the Assessment Act was supposed to come back and get a gauge and assessment of where agencies are across that. DoD has committed to sharing the results of that over time, at least 6 months in the near term, but they're willing to share with us their results and progress along that way. The other is create rigor and standards for professionalization of the workforce. We heard that earlier in some of the other workshops, right? But certainly it's DoD's vision and strategy to certainly harp on that professionalization by providing that rigor and standards. And drive awareness to evolve talent management. Obviously, how they're going to do that is still to come through the evolution of their programs, and then how they're going to build policy and processes programs to enable agility. Because one of the things that I heard in their comments that standards have to be adaptable and move with the changes in technology and the way that the threats are evolving. So being adaptable and agile to the communications of the strategy and how the workforce is going to respond is very important, that the comments and feedback in the strategy are not so rigid that they're not flexible enough to respond to the threats in the country. So I think between the two groups, another common theme is adherence to the NIST framework, right? That 800-181, it was an important element on any strategy that we're going to pursue as a country. And I think as professional organizations and agencies implement the OPM interpretive guidance, which is also based on the NIST framework. I think that's going to be far more effective in having that Rosetta Stone between the pipeline coming in, the organizations that are engaging in this area, and how they're going to sustain and move the organizations forward. So I want to thank the co-chairs. I want to thank the contributions from the participants in Workshop 3. And we'll stick around for a very few minutes. Any comments from the group or questions while I have them available? Okay. Thank you very much.
How about a big hand for those 3 workshops? I'm just going to take a minute. But we framed these problem sets as we went along in preparation for this session here this week. We need your feedback to tell us if we're on the right track. And if we're not, then we'll bend this and make it work next time. If you think the workshops are valuable, we'll absolutely have them again. If you don't think they're valuable, we'll figure out another way to put something in. Well, we want to stress you while you're here, and you could hear a little stress in some of the voices of the speakers here. Some of it is the job, some of it is experience, but collectively we need to find solutions to those problems that were addressed starting on Wednesday morning and wrapping up today. So your feedback is critical. I really appreciate the effort that the workshops put into this today, and we look forward to your feedback in any form or any shape from now through the next 6 months, if necessary, to help us shape and build the next search conference that will be or symposium that will be a winner for all of us. With that, I'm going to introduce Bob Wood, and he'll wrap us up.
Well, we're at this point where there's a lot of, but not a long time, to thank the many people that were involved in this, and we'll make it brief and short, but I want to make sure I allow our key partner at Fort Gordon. Bob, you want to step up and just offer a couple of closing remarks?
Okay, well, first off, thank you all for sticking with us to the end here. It's not quite the end. There is an opportunity following this to get some credit, some CompTIA credit from Pamela and Jack from GDIT, who are going to be here from 3 to 6. You were probably going to mention that, but I thought I'd just say it's not quite the end yet for those of you who want to learn how to pen test your own system at home. Hey, look, I'm Bob Casimir. I'm the deputy to Major General Morrison. For those of you who are here this morning, you heard him in his keynote address several topics of interest to the United States Army, on down a long list of the things we're getting at very quickly. But what I wanted to leave with you is one of his comments, and that is that we really need to raise all boats. And I think that's a theme that you've heard a number of times. You certainly heard it from our guest speakers who are from NSA, who for the last 20-plus years have been doing exactly that with educational institutions and also at the K-12 level. And you've heard that repeated throughout. So I think we're getting after that. I think we've got a long way to go. I'm encouraged with some of the progress that I've seen, and I think just in this forum, which is only, a year old. We had our first one a year ago, and this is number 2. We've had about a 20% increase in the number of registered and attending participants, so I think that's a good sign, but it's a down payment after getting at some wicked problems, and that's really what I wanted to get at is these forums are an opportunity for us to kind of air those wicked problems out to a larger, broader community and get some other perspectives on how we might attack it, and to share, if you will, a Rolodex of professionals in the space. So I hope you've all had an opportunity to do that and make some new connections that we can leverage in the future. And then finally, to motivate us toward action, which is really the challenge that General Morrison put before us. I mean, this is all wonderful and great to get excited about these challenges and to meet new folks and to really take a different tact at things. But what really counts is what we do, as they say, Monday morning. Is it on our to-do list? Are we going to follow up? Are we going to make that connection? Now, not everybody you connected with maybe is somebody that over the next year that you need to follow up with, but maybe 1 out of 10. You know, and if we can do that, I think we can really get after some of these challenges that we have. I know for certain that one of the things that we're going to want to do in this region, and something that I know that we have already done to a degree and we can continue to press on, is work in that K through 12 initiative. I mean, the return on investment is measured in years, in some cases decades there, but we've got to get started because we know we're at the foundation of an initiative that's going to press on for many, many decades for this nation. And that's the challenge of cyberspace and making sure that we're all secure and can live in the kind of world that we want to live in. So with that said, let me all thank you for this few groups here. Number one, I want to first mention, of course, our AFCEA team, General Wood, Mike, Terry, and the whole team that has worked to put this on. Let's give them a round of applause because they've done a wonderful job.